Hey there, Synth drones. Welcome to another edition of Synth Talk, but this time it's the midnight edition. Hi, I'm Pure Ambient Drone, and this is my channel where I vlog about synthesizers. So if you haven't already done so, or maybe you're new here today, or should I say tonight, hit that subscribe button, tap the bell to keep up with all of my synth adventures. Synth Talk, the midnight edition. Well, this is something new that I'm trying on my channel because I hear a lot of people telling me that they absolutely love to listen to synthesizer talk at night while they're going to sleep. And I thought, well, there aren't very many channels out there that actually do that. And I enjoy talking about synthesizers. So I thought I'd give this a shot. So if you like what you're experiencing right now, leave me a comment and let me know. Feedback is so good. So yeah, let's talk about what I want to talk about tonight, and that is my adventure with Sequential. So, for those of you who've been following my channel, you know that I am a Sequential fan, but I haven't always had Sequential synthesizers. And when I first started getting into synthesizers, I was just thinking that Sequential was a dream. They are very expensive, but you do get what you pay for, I believe, with Sequential synth gear. Now, just as a disclaimer, I'm not getting paid by Sequential by any way, shape, or form, and no, I'm not getting any free gear. But I do like to talk about what works for me, and Sequential does work for me. So let's start at the beginning. So here I am going through a lot of different gear, and I started out with digital synthesizers. The very first digital synthesizer I ever recorded with was, of course, a plug-in, a VST. And I didn't know any better. They're not bad. I'm not trying to slam VSTs, but they're certainly not analog sounding in my opinion either. And there was always something missing, and I was always comparing my music to other artists. One of my favorite artists in the beginning was Moby. And I've since grown out of his style of music and have gone more electronic type. I like the Stranger Things soundtrack, things like that. And that's really grown on me a lot through watching the show. So yeah, I'm kind of hooked. But getting back to what I was saying, so I was listening to Moby stuff, and I always remember how warm some of his tracks sounded in comparison to my own. And of course, that has a lot to do with recording equipment as well as instruments. But other artists were also recording soundtracks that were really warm and lush. And I found that they were using, for the most part, a lot of analog gear. And man, just getting started in all of this, I didn't know a whole lot about synthesizers. I don't consider myself a synthesizer guru at this point either. I have always and probably will always consider myself a musical artist, whatever that means. But I do make my music with synthesizers, and so I had to learn that there's an essence about analog gear and a warmth about analog gear. And so you might call me an analog purist, but that's not entirely true because I still have digital synthesizers and I still record with digital synthesizers. But there was always something missing. And so I went off and I got myself, I think the very first sequential synthesizer that I ever owned was a sequential poly evolver. Well, it was actually a Dave Smith instrument, poly evolver. Dave Smith had not regained his name at that time for sequential. So there I was with this poly evolver, and I didn't find it as warm as I thought I was going to. Well, duh. I didn't know much about synthesizers as I thought I did, and learned that it had two digital oscillators and two DCO analog oscillators going through a analog filter. So that gives you a little bit of idea of how much I knew about synthesizers getting into all of this. But I'm a quick study on most things that I do, and quickly found that the more analog you add to a track, the thicker it gets. Sort of like adding vegetables and meats to a stew. The more you add, the thicker the stew is going to get. Now, you don't want to overdo that. I understand completely that you don't want to overdo the thickness in a track, but you can certainly add some real warmth to a track using the right analog gear in conjunction with digital. So what I did is I went on this quest to get as many digital synthesizers, or sorry, as many sequential synthesizers as I could possibly muster and afford, and I ended up with quite a few sequential synthesizers. I still had the Poly Evolver, I had the Prophet 6, the OB6, and I had the Rev 2. And so I had those up until sometime of 2020. I think February leading into March. I think it was March when I lost or sold. I say lost. It feels like I lost my synthesizers. Yes, but I think February was the last one to leave of 2020. And after they were all gone, I replaced a lot of them with digital synthesizers. And that was a mistake because I ended up with a very cold sound to my tracking, to my music, that I wasn't used to and I didn't like. And I immediately, after recording a few tracks, realized, wow, this is some great music, but the instruments I used are lacking a certain warmth that I used to get. Now, I still had other analog gear, but not enough to really inspire me to do soundscapes, pads, and that type of music. And that's what I really enjoy doing the most. And I think I excel at it the most as well. So it's kind of like my genre that I excel at. And I didn't have the equipment that I used to have. And it wasn't just a workflow problem because with the digital synthesizers, I was actually able to adapt to them pretty quickly and use them. So I didn't have any problems recording or workflow. That wasn't the problem. It was the end product. So, looking around in my room, I realized, man, I got rid of a lot of synthesizers from Sequential that were analog, and they were adding this thick, analog, lush cream to my mixes. And so I decided that I was going to take the money that I hadn't spent entirely, that I had received by selling the synthesizers, and start buying them back. Now, I haven't got a Poly Evolver, and but I did. I did get a Prophet 6 OB6 Rev 2. I also got a Rev 2 and the 6 track, and I just had a Pro 3, but I also decided that I didn't need it right now, not now at this stage, and so I sold it at a very affordable price to a friend, and I actually did a video on that. So as it stands, I have the before mentioned synthesizers, and I also have a Prophet X, which I actually never did sell. So I did have the Prophet X for throughout this. Now, the Prophet X is a digital synthesizer in that its oscillators are digital, but it has an analog filter in it and is capable of sampling. And 8Dio provides some really great sample packs of some vintage synthesizers, to name a few, the ARP 2600 and the Prophet 5. And here's something interesting that a lot of people don't know about the Prophet X, and that is it has a remake of the filter that you find in the Korg Poly 6 and some other famous synthesizers. And at the top of my head, I really can't remember what it's called. I want to say it is the SI 2144, but you may have to Google that or search for it just to find out. Just Google the filter inside the Prophet X. But because of that filter, it sounds really nice and warm. And it's one of my favorite filters, and that's why I bought a Poly 6 from Korg. I've always wanted one, and I've had a few of them, but they've never arrived in working condition. They've always had something wrong with them. And I've had to return them because they either got damaged in shipping or they weren't as described. And they're very old synthesizers. So the first thing I had to get was my Prophet 6 back because I really miss the Prophet 6. I really missed it. The Prophet 6 is unlike any other synthesizer out there except for possibly the Prophet 5, which is not the same thing, okay? A Prophet 5 and a Prophet 6 are not the same synthesizer, but that doesn't mean that you can't use a Prophet 6 for many of the chores that a Prophet 5 could do. In fact, the Prophet 5 presets are found inside the Prophet 6 as a little bonus for everybody to enjoy. But the Prophet 6 has this really nice, deep, low end that is not muddy, and it can be really punchy if you want it to be. But it can also open up. This synthesizer can open up and be extremely aggressive, but it can also be tamed back and be very smooth. And that's a nice thing to have. So it is a VCO, voltage controlled oscillators, and because of that, it's raw analog power. And so I find myself when I'm doing soft music with it, taming back the filter on it. Now, the OB6 is the second one that I got back. And the OB6, a lot of people say, well, which one do I need? Do I need the OB6? Do I need the Prophet 6? Which one should I get? They really are chocolate and vanilla if you were to compare them to ice cream, okay? They complement one another, but in my opinion, they are two different synthesizers altogether. Now, when I'm assessing a synthesizer, I'm doing so from a listening standpoint. I'm doing so also from a workflow. It's kind of hard to explain this, but if I can't work with the synthesizer, it doesn't always, okay, matter to me how it sounds. Now, of course, there would be exceptions, but if I can't work with the synthesizer, and when I say I can't work, I should say when I struggle to work with one or I'm just uncomfortable with one, it doesn't always matter what it sounds like to me. I usually let it go because workflow is so important to me because I produce a lot of music. And I do a lot of projects that involve needing to work quickly and work with hardware. So anyway, the OB6, the way I look at it is from a sound perspective because that is very important to me. It is the most important part of a synthesizer, obviously, because it is a tool that makes sound and that we use that sound to make music and whatnot. So when I compare the OB6 to the Prophet 6, I see a dirtier, crunchier sound compared to the Prophet 6. And to me, that's a really great sound to mix with the Prophet 6. So what I believe that Dave Smith did in designing these and working with these synthesizers was to make sure that they would complement one another. Companies that know what they're doing, they won't keep repeating the same products over and over and over again and just repackaging them. That's not what Dave Smith did with the OB6 and the Prophet 6. He made two products that complement one another, and it is so hard for a person like myself even to pick just one of them. It just really is. And I think that's why, because we're using the analogy chocolate and vanilla ice cream. I think that's why somebody invented twist ice cream and Neapolitan in case somebody likes strawberry too. And if I had to compare a synthesizer to the flavor of Neapolitan, it would have to be the Pro 3 because here you have the Prophet 6, the OB6, and the digital oscillator in the mix. When I say the OB6 and the Prophet 6, I mean their filters, of course. And then he threw in the Moog ladder filter remake that he's done just for fun. So I guess that would be your Strawberry, maybe your digital oscillator with your ladder filter. There you go. There's your strawberry flavor. And I guess the whole whipped cream of it is the fact that you have paraphonic. So all this is very interesting to me that they came out with this Pro 3. But moving along, so I went back to the Rev 2 because it is a jack of all trades. I have a friend and he told me, and I liked the way he said it, he said it is a jack of all trades, but a master of none of them. The Rev 2, in my opinion, it doesn't really excel at any one thing, but it doesn't make it a bad synthesizer. It just makes it a real good workhorse. And I think that's what it was designed to be. It's great for underlining pads. It's great for some key work. It can do a lot. It just can't master everything. Would I ever use it for bass? Well, because I have the Prophet 6, which I think is really good for bass. I even have a Moog Slim Fatty, by the way, which is really good for bass. I have a lot of synthesizers that are good for bass, and because of that reason, no, I would not pick a Rev 2 for that sole purpose. But can it be used for that? Yes. Have I ever used it for that? Yes, I have. So it is a jack of all trades. I just wouldn't say that it's a master. When I say that, what I mean is that you can get anything out of that synth that you want, but sometimes, many times, in some cases, you have to work for it. You have to dig. And when you dig, you get rewarded with that synth. So it's not an instant gratification as far as being a master of a certain type of sound, but it certainly is a jack of all trades where if you need something quick and you need it right now, you just got to get it going. Bam, the Rev 2 is always there on standby, ready to give you something quick. But then you have the Prophet 6 where you're saying, hey, I want something really punchy and bassy. Bam. The Prophet 6 can deliver that really quick. But that's not the only thing that the Prophet 6 is good at. It's fantastic at leads. It's fantastic at pads. But I will tell you this, getting to the pad part, the Prophet 6, because it can be very aggressive, you do have to work it to make those pads work for you. At least I do. And there's only 6 voices, so you're not going to get the super long released pads that I like using it without polychaining it maybe. And that's one of the things I've been thinking about doing is polychaining the Prophet 6 to a module. That would be pretty interesting because then that would have 12 voices. So whereas the Rev 2 wouldn't be my first choice for bass, the Prophet 6, believe it or not, wouldn't be my first choice for long drawn-out pads. But I do use it for that. I just have to work at it. It's just not my first choice in many cases. But again, that's not a slam on the synthesizer. I'm just telling you how I'm using my gear. So let me think for a moment. So the 6-track is kind of a peculiar little monster. I call it a little monster because it's very unassuming. Here you have this shorter than usual key bed, and you don't have much to work with as far as instant knob tweaking. Okay, you got one knob, and you got these buttons, and you have to pick the parameter you want to change. And it becomes very tedious if you want to do any sound design with this thing. Somebody told me that this 6-track was, I guess, maybe the first synthesizer with MIDI. I don't know. That's what I was told. It could be. But the 6-track is a really, really peculiar little machine because here you have 6 voices with VCO oscillators, 1 per voice. And I'm going to tell you something. This thing has some deep, deep low end if you want it. It's a very powerful synthesizer. But that being said, it is a pain sometimes for me to work with it. And I'm not going to lie to you, when I'm working on a project and I'm like, flowing with the pads and making the songs I want, I'm looking over that thing thinking, hey, I could add the 6-track because I love the way it sounds. Now, it does have, I believe, Curtis filters in it, but because it's VCO, it's a different flavor than the Rev 2, which also has Curtis filters. So I'm looking at this thing, and I do this every time I make a track. I look at it and I go, do I really want to fiddle with that thing? But it sounds so good that I like adding it to almost every track I have. So it is a very interesting synthesizer from Sequential. Of course, that's an older one, and I got a really great deal on one that it looks like to me it's in near mint condition. Okay. So that leaves me to talk about the Prophet 12. And this is I believe, the final one I need to talk about because I already talked about almost all of the other ones. The Prophet 12 is a complete digital synthesizer as far as the oscillators go, but the filter is Curtis. The filters are Curtis, and the rest of it's just digital. It's 4 oscillators, and it can make some wild and crazy sounds. And to compare it to another synthesizer is really hard to do because it's different than any other synth I've ever got my hands on. I will tell you this, a lot of people like to compare it to the Novation Peak or the Novation Summit, which they like to bill as the 2 peaks in one. I've had a Peak, and I don't think that it really compares to that. There's a certain metallic, crisp sound to the Prophet 12. It's really hard to describe, but like I said, I like to look at synthesizers from a sound point of view. Whereas the Peak or the Summit, should I say, it has, I think, a bit of a thinner sound, in my opinion. I would not use, if I had to pick between the two of them for bass, I would have to pick the Prophet 12. I think that it has a better low end to it. At least it did for me with the Peak. I used to have a Prophet 12 at the same time I had a Peak. So I thought that the Prophet 12 was better for certain things back then than the Peak was. And that's the only thing I can compare it to because it doesn't really compare to really much other instruments on the market. I've heard some people say that the Summit is, Summit slash Peak is comparable to the Rev 2. But remember, the Rev 2 is digital controlled oscillators. They are analog and they go through an analog filter, whereas the Summit slash Peak is digital oscillators going through. I believe it's a analog filter. I'm not 100% sure about that, but because I already have this, I personally would probably never buy a Summit unless I got it at a ridiculous price. But I don't know. I hate saying never because I end up getting stuff that I say I'm never going to get. So that's the lowdown on the gear. And so, what am I using all of this for? Well, I've started a new album, and it's going to be a slow, relaxing album, and that's what I like to do. I like to do those kinds of tracks, and I've had a lot of fun with the workflow. And so that's what I've been using the synthesizers on. Of course, now I'm not using only sequential. Okay, I've got a Korg Prologue that is also a VCO 16 voice monster synth, and that thing is incredible as well. That's a really good synthesizer, and I like to marry it up because it plays so good with sequential. Really, if I had to pick one synthesizer to play with the sequentials, it would have to be the Korg Prologue. So if you've got a lot of sequential gear or just a few, it doesn't matter. You can't go wrong, in my opinion, with a Korg Prologue. But that's just me, and that's what I like marrying it up with, is taking those sequentials and mixing in some Prologue with it. But I also mix some digital synthesizers in there too to kind of cool things off because with all that warmth, it starts to heat up real thick. And sometimes too much warmth can give you a little bit of mud in your mix that you don't want. And as tracks build up, you can get a lot of unwanted thickness. And not that thick isn't good, because it is, but sometimes you have to thin it out a little bit just so you can hear what's going on. It doesn't do any good to make everything so thick and then the listener can't really enjoy it because everything's competing in the same texture and what I call sound character range. You need a little bit of thin here, you need a little bit of thickness here, and you need a little bit of middle ground as well. So that's what I want to talk about with you tonight. I hope you enjoyed Synth Talk Midnight Edition. That means that I'm going to be uploading this at midnight Central Time. I don't know how many of these I'm going to do. It depends on the response I get from you in the comments below. So if you like this, give it a like, give it a share. And be sure to leave a comment and let me know that you're enjoying these, because I certainly don't want to be doing something that you don't like me doing. And it means a lot to me when I get constructive feedback. So if you like these midnight synth talks, let me know in the comments. Make it loud and clear so I know. But until next time, I am Pure Ambient Drone, aka James Drone. And keep calm and synth on.